I'm Jesse Weber, in for Chris Cuomo, who, as we were saying, is enjoying a well-deserved week off. The guy never takes a break. But what are we talking about? So we got a full show, but we're going to start with a crackdown on crime in America's capital city. So President Trump ordered a federal takeover to fight Washington, D.C.'s crime and homelessness. He is sending hundreds of National Guard troops to D.C., sending FBI agents to patrol the streets, even having U.S. Marshals oversee the operation. Now, President Trump didn't pull any punches in his announcement, that's for sure.
Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people, and we're not going to let it happen anymore. It's embarrassing for me to be up here. You know, I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia on Friday. I don't like being up here talking about how unsafe and how dirty and disgusting this once beautiful capital was.
Now, not surprisingly, liberals, they push back, saying, you know, violent crime hit a 30-year low in the city last year. The numbers show it's lower in a wide range of categories. It's true, including armed assault, homicide, sex crimes. However, the murder rate in D.C. has more than doubled since 2012. So here's the question. What do the men and women who are actually on the front lines of crime in D.C. think about the federal takeover? Who better to ask than the chairman of the D.C. Police Union, Gregg Pemberton. Thank you so much for coming on. Really good to see you. Okay, what is the reaction from the men and women in blue? And from a practical, logistical point of view, I don't think we're talking about this enough. What is the day-to-day? What does the National Guard do when we talk about federal police force? How do things change? Do they have the training to make stops and counter crime in the city? What are we talking about logistically?
Well, first of all, we completely agree with the president that crime in the District of Columbia is out of control and something needs to be done about it. I think it's also important to understand how we got here, which is that back in 2020, the D.C. City Council passed a mountain of legislation that handcuffed police officers, made it impossible to charge criminals, exposed cops to administrative, civil, and criminal liability, even when they did their jobs properly. And since then, we're now down 800 sworn positions. Our authorized strength is 4,000 sworn officers. We currently have 3,180, so more than 800 vacancies here on the police department. The way that the department makes up for that shortage is through 2 million hours of mandatory overtime, which just adds to the burnout and the attrition rate here in the city. And this is the main reason why we can't get a handle on crime ourselves, is because of this legislation that the council has passed and the combination of shortage of police officers. So we welcome any help we can get. To answer your question, the National Guard, I think there are limitations in what they can do from a policing standpoint. I mean, they are authorized to make arrests. That typically happens in the nature of a civil unrest, some sort of protest that turns into a riot. I don't envision that the National Guard will be making traffic stops or conducting shooting or stabbing investigations, but they will be there establishing a presence and letting people in these neighborhoods know that there are folks with law enforcement capabilities active in those areas, and they can always report directly to police officers as to what they see or what they're observing, which does lighten the load for the patrol officer, who can then focus on other more important issues. The federal law enforcement agents that come in, similarly, I think they're going to need a little bit of hand-holding from the local cops to show them where and what's going on in these neighborhoods. But I do think they'll have a big impact on actually being able to make arrests and do investigations. So we welcome all of this help. I think the concern that we have from the rank and file is that we know it's temporary. This authority that Trump invoked is only valid for 30 days. And at the end of that 30 days, as you mentioned in the intro, has to be established by Congress if it wants to go any further than that. So, you know, we don't want to be left holding the bag when 1,000 National Guardsmen and 500 federal officers move on, and now we're here. So we're hoping that during this time frame that the White House and Congress can identify the problems, and we're happy to help them with that, and maybe we can go back and repeal some of this legislation that the council passed.
So listen, the skeptics, right, the critics, they are going to hit you with the why now. Of all times, why now? And I'm going to show you some stats here, because if we talk about crime being out of control in D.C., there are stats from the D.C. police showing a dramatic decrease in violent crime this year. So 26% down for violent crimes, 28% down in robbery, 20% down in armed assault, 12% down in homicide, 50% down in sex crimes. Now, Washington, D.C. had a scourge of carjackings in 2023 last year, fell back below to 2022 levels. You have murders in the district that rose throughout the president's first term. Homicides right now, I say just, but 15 15% above the 20-year average. Question is, out of all times to do this, and I know there's a lot of people who say, is this a distraction? We'll get into the politics in a second, but why now if you're looking at these numbers?
I think it's a good question, and there's two answers to that. One, we have a lot of questions about the accuracy of these crime stats that they're reporting. First of all, 2023 was one of the most violent years we've seen in the past 3 decades. So if that's what we're using as our framework or our baseline to say, oh, the crime is down, frankly, I'm not sure that we should be taking victory laps to come down from 30-year highs. But we do have concerns about the legitimacy of these. We know that from local reporting here in the district that it's been uncovered that a commander is under investigation for manipulating crime stats. He's been accused of going back into police databases and changing felonies to misdemeanors to keep those numbers down. What we believe is happening is that this is a pattern of practice within the command staff, and he's certainly not doing this maliciously on his own, but this is what is being ordered from the very top to make sure that these stats stay low. In addition to that, I know it's anecdotal, but our members report to us that they're being told on the scene to take classifications for lesser offenses. So a robbery turns into a theft, a carjacking turns into a stolen auto, and on and on. So I'm not entirely convinced that the numbers that we're seeing are accurate, but even if they are, I don't think we should be cheering on minor decreases from 30-year highs. I think there's much more to be done. As you mentioned, in 2012, we had 88 homicides, and now people are trying to normalize 200. I don't think that's right. I think we should be trying to get these numbers down to 0 or as close to 0 as we can get them.
Am I wrong that the mayor has, as we were talking about, a careful, tepid response to this? She seems almost deferential to the president here. Now, she did push back on the crime statistics, suggesting maybe this is not necessary, but I was talking about it with Elizabeth. There's only legally so much she can do to challenge the president's authority. What can you tell us about her response to this?
This is the mayor's disposition on this issue. She has always been an avid supporter of law enforcement. Even in 2020, when activists came out of the woodwork demanding to defund the police, demanding to limit the scope and size of the police department, responsibilities of police officers, she has always said, and she has always been on the same page, that we need to have the proper number of officers and they need to be properly trained. And she has never wavered from that. I think she probably understands that there are problems within the police department and that, unfortunately, it's gotten to the point where maybe we do need some help. So she's managed that messaging pretty well, and I commend her for doing that. I'd like to see her go further and say that the police department really does need to be fixed. But in this environment, that's difficult.
Yep, we'll see who it changes or what happens. D.C. Police Union Chairman Gregg Pemberton, thanks so much for coming on, and thank you for your service.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Got it. All right, so we talked the logistics, we talked the numbers, now we got to talk politics about this, right? So I want to bring in Democratic strategist, former Obama campaign advisor Ameshia Cross, and former acting Deputy Homeland Security Secretary from Trump's first term, Ken Cuccinelli. Great to have you both here. Ameshia, I'll start with you. Look, I gave the stats. I talked about the skeptics out there. At the same time, this is a winning issue for the president. Murders in D.C. have been on a longer-term upswing since 2012. We talk about violent crime is still there. You wonder whether or not this could work. What is the issue you see with the president doing this?
The narrative and the way that he's doing it. I don't think that, and I live in D.C., I work in D.C., I'm originally from Chicago, I know crime. I don't think that anybody can deny that there are some people in some communities that have suffered in D.C. as respectfully during the pandemic and the immediacy after the pandemic. What they've also seen is a great level of decrease since. With that being said, D.C. leads among urban centers as having the largest drop in crime. You could not have the largest drop in crime, but also have a president acting as though bedlam is happening in the streets and we need to call out everybody overnight. This is the same president who just a few months ago, during his first 100 days, shouted out the progress of D.C. as a byproduct of his first 100 days in office, even though no policy from him actually affected or was even targeting towards D.C. policing. I think that Muriel Bowser is extremely smart in her strategy. And I don't think that I take issue with the term deferential here. I think she knows the law, and that's why she is abiding in the way that she is. But more so, she would like to lean on the White House in a way that I think is smart in terms of them coming up with policy recommendations and initiatives that we know reduce violent crime, that reduce crime broadly. Some of the same things that we saw funded that helped to reduce Baltimore's crime and have helped to reduce DC's crime over the past few years. Those are things we want to see in that trajectory continue. Unfortunately, with Donald Trump, what he does is continue to label cities, particularly cities that are led by Black mayors, as dangerous, as violent,
Well,
as homeless and drug-ridden. And I don't see how that helps anybody.
so, Ken, that's an interesting point. If this is a success story, whatever success is measured in 30 days, does the president try to push forward in non-blue states? There's other ones out there, right? There's Miami, Oklahoma City, Fort Worth. Every place has crime. I know this is what I study all the time. But the point is does he say, hey, we're going to look at this across the board? This is not political. I'm looking at red and blue cities across.
Yeah, I think, well, I can't name many red cities. You mentioned Miami, that's one. But they don't have the kind of soft on crime problem that D.C. has a recent history of. I mean, the last time Congress overturned the D.C. law was 2023, and it was a soft on crime package. And I'm a criminal justice reform conservative. So, I'm not averse to addressing that stuff, but they went way overboard. Even Joe Biden supported that effort. The Democrat Senate supported that effort. And Mayor Bowser was overridden in her veto of that. So this is a pretty radical city council when it comes to how to deal with crime. We all heard from the union chairman there, Gregg Pemberton, who's on the street with it, living with it every day. And he noted that also part of the recruiting problem that you mentioned, Jesse, is the direction the city council has gone here. So they've caused a lot of their own crime problems in recent years. And I think the president, he has 30 days to beef this up with the control of the police department. How long he extends other federal participation is up to him. And of course, maybe it shouldn't go without saying, Washington, D.C. is the easiest city for him to take these aggressive steps against crime in because it's a federal district that is not in a state. So there's a lot more federal authority available for the president to work with.
Legally, you are right about that. And Ameshia, look, if I asked 10 people on the street about D.C., I would guarantee a majority of them would talk about, oh, I've heard D.C.'s not safe. I heard it's crime-ridden. That's the optic that's out there. And by the way, D.C. has the 4th highest murder rate in the nation. Criminal justice system, you want to say, might not be working. 53% of arrests for carjackings in D.C. are juveniles. Again, going back to this idea, what happens if it works? What happens if these numbers, and we can trust what these numbers are dramatically different in, I don't know, a month, 6 months, a year, depending if Congress allows this to continue, Ameshia? What then?
Well, I think that since we talked about the timing of this a little bit ago, it's important to note that he's timing this just a few short weeks before school is in session. What we do know about those young people is that once summer ends and school is back in session, no matter what city you live in, crime stats typically go down. So what my fear is that he will take a victory lap irrespective to his policy not necessarily working, because we know that those trends of violence going down, particularly violence that is incurred by young people, will go down in large part because they're back in school and because summer is over. That is something that has been seen for decades over the course of time when we talk about crime stats. He's going to utilize that as a push. With that being said, I think that D.C. is very unique in the sense that they don't have a governor. They are not a state. They're not somebody who's able to naturally control this seizure. In other states where in states where we've seen these crime statistics go down, in large part because of work between governors and mayors, putting in after-school programs, ensuring that mental health supports and services are there, working with job force development programs, making sure that those young people have a job, ensuring that, individuals who are recidivizing actually have housing and things to do after they get out, so they will not be going back to jail or prison afterwards. We know what the tried and true methods of reducing violent crime are. They have not changed. What has is we have a president who doesn't believe in policy, but only believes in bluster and ensuring that he gets the photo op that he wants.
Well, we were talking. He legally can do this. I guess the question is, and Ken, and just to throw this to you, what happens if this pushes crime out of D.C. to, let's say, Virginia, where you served? Is that a real concern?
Yeah.
The blowback of this.
So the more likely is Maryland, simply because of the neighborhood connections there along the eastern side of the city, in particular, where you have more residents. But the fact is, D.C. affects crime around D.C. There's no question, and I fully expect Governor Youngkin, I fully expect the Maryland officials to pay more attention in the next 6 months or so to that possibility, because there's no question crime can move. But the fact of the matter is, the statistics have shown us for a long time, people commit crime near where they live. So it isn't likely that someone's going to move from, a neighborhood in D.C. 10 miles away into Maryland or Virginia and continue the exact same behavior. Part of the reason they perform the violent or criminal behavior where they are is because they've built up a way to do it there. They've grown up there. They're part of the gangs there that the president referenced. And look, I don't necessarily disagree with some of the programs Ameshia mentioned, but let's not forget the most basic ones, which is you arrest the 80-20 rule. You arrest the 20% and put them in jail who are performing 80% of the violent crime. That has worked in Virginia. It has worked in Maryland. It has worked across the country. So we can't leave that out. And this city council has been leaving that piece out. Well, and let's root for success.
I think we all should root for success. We'll see if it actually happens. The timing is interesting, though, after all the FBI firings last week. Is this kind of a stance, a different stance on law enforcement? Conversation for a different time. Ameshia Cross,
I don't think any of those guys are going to be walking the street.
It definitely shifts the narrative from the Epstein files, which was his...
Oh, boy. I should have dedicated another 10 minutes to this. I threw that to the end. I'll tell you what. I'm here all week. Maybe we'll talk about it again. Ameshia, Ken, good to see you both. Thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
You got it. All right, up next. So President Trump campaigned on the promise to end the war in Ukraine, and we are just days away from his meeting with Vladimir Putin. But what price will Trump and Ukraine have to pay for Russia to agree to a deal? We're going to take you live to Kyiv. Plus, Israel's military, it is getting a lot of blowback over the killing of 5 Al Jazeera journalists this weekend. But so is a Palestinian-American activist. Why? He's going to join me next. And by the way, you guys know me from my true crime podcast, Sidebar. Later on, I'm going to take your questions live on the true crime stories you are obsessed with. 1-844-968-7720. Call me. I got no one else to talk to. Speak to you then. Well, after a year of talking about how he would end the war in Ukraine, President Trump is finally getting his sit-down with Vladimir Putin in just a few days. But the question is, how much progress can be made on Friday in Alaska when Vladimir Zelensky didn't get an invite? And what is Ukraine going to have to give up for peace? Well, NewsNation foreign correspondent Robert Sherman joins us live from Kyiv with the details. Robert, it's good to see you. So what's the latest?
Yeah, hey there, Jesse. Well, Friday is going to be a big day for sure. A one-on-one sit-down between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump. No Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is all meant to be a feel-out meeting, according to the president, to determine how serious Russia is. But he insists he will be pushing Russia to end the war. Take a listen.
President Putin invited me to get involved. He wants to get involved. I believe he wants to get it over with. Now, I've said that a few times. Then I've been disappointed. I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war, you got to end it. There'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody, for the good of Ukraine. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine.
So the president says if all goes well, his first phone call will be to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to tell him if a deal can be made or not, with the ultimate objective of getting the Russian leader and the Ukrainian leader and potentially President Trump all in the same room together in order to close the deal. Jesse?
And how are the Ukrainians responding to this, especially the idea of a land swap?
Well, I mean, you've seen Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky drawing his line in the sand. He put out a statement here tonight that I want to read for you. It says, first, Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected. Second, issues concerning the war against Ukraine must be resolved only with Ukraine's participation. And third, Russia must take the necessary steps to end this war. So far, Russia has not taken a single step. And those tensions existing here tonight, we just heard sirens here in Kyiv just a short while ago, with the war very much so continuing on as we press forward to Friday. Jesse?
All right, Robert Sherman, thank you so much. Now, by the way, Robert's NewsNation special report, Ukraine on the front lines, now available on YouTube. Hope everybody can check that out. But now we move on to another big international story that's happening. Sure you saw about it. Israel sparked outrage around the world with a targeted strike in Gaza that killed 5 Al Jazeera journalists, including most notably 28-year-old Anas al-Sharif. But while Benjamin Netanyahu is taking a lot of the blame, So is a Palestinian-American writer and activist for a social media post from about 6 months ago about al-Sharif. Why? Well, let's ask him. We're joined right now by Amed Fawud al-Khatib, joins me live along with former Israeli special operator Aaron Cohen, who's also founder of Gideon AI Threat Detection for Law Enforcement. Thank you both so much for coming here. Amed, so what happened 6 months ago? Why are you taking heat? And what do you want to clarify about the post?
Well, I think unfortunately some people are so eager to take you down. Some people take such issue with a Palestinian from Gaza who has skin in the game, who can hold multiple truths, who can be critical of Hamas, critical of Israeli policies and actions, who wants peace, who wants stability in Gaza to avoid the further bloodshed. And so this tweet from February, from 10 months ago, was me describing how Anas al-Sharif and a few group of activists were involved in a drone flying an incident in which they flew a drone over the Nitazenes corridor in Gaza during the short-lived ceasefire, the 51-day-long ceasefire. And I called that out as reckless behavior. And I've never spoken about him since. I've never specifically talked about him or what he is doing in Gaza. And unfortunately, his killing, which I will get to in a second, and what I think about it, has been somehow attributed to me as if the Israeli targeting apparatus is sitting there and looking at my tweets and using that as an excuse to go after journalists. This is complete hogwash. This is fake. This is out of context. And this just shows how difficult it can be for Palestinian moderates and pragmatists and practical voices to push back against the entrenched narratives within the pro-Palestine community.
And to be clear, you have been anti-Hamas. That's been clear. However, let's just talk about al-Sharif for a minute. So the IDF has come forward and called him a terrorist. They said when they looked at documentation, they say it proves that he was a member of Hamas. He was leading up a terrorist cell, that Al Jazeera knew about this. They tried to distance themselves from him. That he had a roster, that he had terrorist training lists, salary records. They even went on the record and saying a press badge isn't a shield for terrorism. What concerns you most about his death?
Well, I'm very concerned by what appears to be surface level evidence that, you can produce all sorts of claims about someone, just like people are claiming that I was responsible for his death and that I am supplying the Israeli military with targeting databases for killing journalists. I am concerned by the timing of his killing. Why is he now, almost 2 years into the war, why is he now being killed right as the Israeli military is ramping up operations and bombardment in Gaza, right after the declaration that the Israeli military is going to occupy fully Gaza and expand the military operation? Why is his killing part of a pattern in which a lot of over 176 journalists, Palestinian journalists, were killed in the Gaza Strip? And yes, I know that some journalists have played maybe nefarious roles in the past, but nevertheless, there is a pattern of denying the entry of foreign journalists and international reporters into Gaza and going after local reporters and local journalists. And that makes it seem as if there's a systematic effort to suppress news coming out of Gaza.
So let me turn it to you, Aaron, right? There is this problem here, and the problem is, optics-wise, it couldn't look worse for Israel. I mean, he's a member of the press. You know, on one hand, the IDF can say he was a terrorist, he was a target, he was a danger, and at the same time, there is this narrative, and you heard it from Amed, that of all people to kill, you kill a member of the press, is the idea to shield what might be or may not be going on over there. What is your response to this, Aaron?
So, Jesse, here's where I'm at with all this. This has nothing to do with silencing journalism. This is about Hamas, a Hamas terrorist hiding under a press vest. It's nothing more than that. And by the way, we don't have surfaced evidence. We have some of the finest intelligence in the world. Have a look at the pager operation that we pulled off where we single-handedly dismantled Hezbollah in the press of one button. Hamas has been doing this for years. And no disrespect to your guest, I know he's trying to be on the right side of this, but they've been embedding fighters in press tents, hospitals, ambulances, because they know that Israel follows the laws of armed conflict, and Hamas weaponizes that law, and in the process, they put real journalists in danger. And the IDF, when they say that they've recovered evidence, this is not a crime scene, Jesse, like the show that you host. This is a counterterrorism battlefield, and right now it is kinetic. It has not stopped being kinetic, regardless of whether Israel's pushed into Gaza City. There will be records and there will be names, and Israel's producing that evidence, and it's probably very detailed. This guy was a Hamas operative with a camera, moving under press credentials to push propaganda in order to be able to operate in plain sight. We saw this in 2012. We saw it in 2014. Hamas embeds inside the press corps, dares Israel to respond, and then uses that outrage as a weapon. This is part of the machine. But I want to talk about Al Jazeera. I think we need to be clear here of who he worked for. Al Jazeera is not Reuters, Jesse. Al Jazeera is a state-owned propaganda arm for the Qatari government. This is the same regime that bankrolls and shelters Hamas leaders in Doha. And they've spent years platforming leaders running unverified casualty numbers straight from Hamas's so-called health ministry and producing every narrative designed to target Israel's right to defend itself. And their Gaza bureau operates under Hamas's authority. Every camera shot, every interview is filtered through their terror group's media office. And if they air something that Hamas doesn't approve, guess what? Nigmara sipur, like we say in Hebrew, they get shut down. So when people call this an Al Jazeera journalist killing, to the journalists, and I work in the media space just like you, they're leaving out the part where the network itself is part of the conflict. These guys aren't neutral. This guy wasn't neutral. This was enemy infrastructure dressed as news, and he got killed by Israel. And if you pull that business with us, you're going to get killed.
So we have about 30 seconds, Amed. I want to give you the final word to respond to Aaron.
I think the best way forward is to allow international and foreign journalists into Gaza to report so that we're not reliant on Al Jazeera, we're not reliant on citizen journalists, and so that we can actually understand the extent of the casualties and the extent of the damage and the extent of the horror that's been unfolding, and so that not everything coming out of Gaza can be labeled as Pallywood or as fake or as doctored. And I think that's the best way in which there can be a credible way in which Israel can prove it is not attempting to suppress news coming out of Gaza.
Amed, Fawud, Al-Khatib, and Aaron Cohen, thank you both so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate you.
You got it. All right, up next. This, and I want to be very clear about it, this is an issue that could easily impact you and your family. I don't say that lightly. Two mothers are going to join us with the heartbreaking story of losing their sons to a new drug that is 43 times more powerful than fentanyl. They've got a message that you have to hear next. And welcome back to Cuomo, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber in for Chris. So for years, we've talked to you and warned you about the dangers of fentanyl. But now, there is another deadly opioid that is 43 times more powerful than fentanyl. But I'll tell you what, you wouldn't know it by the lack of coverage. I want you to remember this name, Nitazenes. This is a synthetic opioid, and just like fentanyl, it is being mixed into other street drugs, and even a tiny amount can be deadly. In January, 22-year-old Lucci McAllister died after taking what he thought was a Xanax. It ended up being entirely made up of a form of Nitazenes. Just 3 months later, Lucci's friend, 21-year-old Hunter Clement, died after taking what he thought was a Percocet, but that was also Nitazenes. Now the boys' mothers are speaking out with a warning that everybody needs to hear. Lucci's mother, Gray McAllister, and Hunter's mom, Ruthie Clement, join me now for their first ever TV interview. Thank you both so much for coming on. I'm so sorry for both of your losses. This is unimaginable, and thinking about how it happened makes no sense. Gray, tell us what happened to Lucci and why it is important to get this message out to the American people.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. This is such an important message. We're losing children every day. Lucci passed on January 26th. We received the toxicology report about 8 weeks later, roughly. And when I met with the medical examiner's office, they came out and they spoke with me, and they wanted to make sure that I understood that all the usual culprits they might look for in a toxicology report were not there. Lucci consumed pure imperilladino protonitazine. There was no other known synthetic opioid, anything else in there. And with a background in healthcare education, both for doctors as well as retailers, I, of course, started trying to gather as much information as possible. And there was very little out there 6 months ago. And that was terrifying to me because, as the medical examiner said, we don't know how much of this stuff is in there. The only reason we caught it in Lucci's case was because there was nothing else there, right? So it's not on drug testing panels, the majority of them right now. EMS is not very, very aware of it, as well as, your ER physicians. It requires multiple rounds of Narcan to potentially be effective in reviving someone. And people are dying every day from this. And it's terrifying. I think of the thousands of people that we lost from fentanyl before it was ever in anyone's vernacular. We have children now, whether it be, young adults, right, from our millennials down to our Gen Z, who have grown up in this epidemic. All they know is the opioid epidemic, and it is getting more and more deadly. And we really have to work to spread this awareness. And I'm so grateful for this platform and for being with you tonight.
No, I can't thank you both for coming on to talk about this hidden danger. I mean, really the unknown. And Ruthie, I mean, your story is so tragic because the day that you found out your son Hunter had died from Nitazenes, you reached out to Gray. Why did you do that?
Because I just had this feeling that overcame me that if Gray and I met each other, that somehow we could connect and make a difference and our children would not have died in vain. We can promote this drug that no one I know knows anything about it. Every single person that I have connected and had a conversation with has no idea what Nitazene is and how dangerous it is. And I'm just so glad that Gray and I have connected, and we're reaching out, she especially, to other venues and things like that so that we can get the word out that this is dangerous and that our friends, our families could be exposed to this and they might not even know. Like a little kid could pick up a pill and not know what it is. So many people think, yes, Hunter and Lucci ingested these pills on purpose. And yes, they both took a pill that they didn't think it was Nitazene, but they took it and not knowing that they could potentially die. They would never have done that to their families.
And Ruthie, like there is in so many cases that I cover, unfortunately, the toxicity of social media and online comments, you mentioned it. You've been receiving blowback from this. I mean, can you explain what the response is that you've received?
Yes, on the first article that came out this morning, there are people that are making comments of how, we're not good parents, that these kids that take these drugs should be killed and the drug dealers should be killed. And it's just very hurtful and I don't mean to use this word, but it seems kind of ignorant also.
No, you can use that word. I think that's entirely fair. Listen, Gray, Ruthie, thank you both so much for coming on. I'm looking at your boys right now. They were beautiful young men. I want to get the message out. This is an important conversation. Our hearts and our prayers go out to you and your entire families, and we're wishing you nothing but success in getting this message out and saving lives. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
You got it. So here's now the question. How widespread is the drug, and how is it getting into the country? So for that, I want to bring in retired DEA Administrator Jack Riley. Jack, thanks so much for coming on. So how is it getting into the country, and what can be done to stop it?
Well, currently, primarily it's coming from clandestine labs in China, who have obviously developed a relationship with the Mexican cartels over the last 10 years with the production of fentanyl and the chemicals required. So my fear is that this is the next play in the cartel playbook to try to replicate the success in which they've had with fentanyl. And you got to understand, this is 100% stronger probably than street level heroin. So the people using it and the people selling it have absolutely no idea what they're taking. Fentanyl really began showing up here as cut in heroin and then progressed to look-alike pills. So the landscape's changed, and I think we're going to be able to see these types of drugs in the future showing up in a variety of different formats. So we're going to have a robust law enforcement effort. We're going to have to work with the Chinese, but I think education right now to our young people is really important. And my heart goes out to the two families that lost their kids. I swear, this is what keeps me up all night.
Well, the first step is for everybody to know that name, Nitazenes. That's the thing, to educate, to make people aware, to get this to be stopped before it ultimately becomes even worse than it currently is. Jack Riley, thank you so much for coming on. Wish we had a little bit more time, but you definitely broke it down for us. We now have a better understanding about what's going on. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You got it. All right, up next. Did the director of national intelligence just admit that alien life is real? Yeah, we're going to play you what Tulsi Gabbard just said that has the UFO community buzzing? Yeah, the man who ran the Pentagon's secretive program on UFOs for a decade, Lou Elizondo, is going to join me next. Stay with us. What does the government really know about aliens and UFOs? And what's the truth about all those drone sightings over New Jersey last year? Remember that? Well, the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, just told the Pod Force One podcast that the truth may be out there. Take a look.
So do you believe that there could be aliens?
I honestly, like, my personal belief, I have my own views and opinions.
Right.
In this role, I got to be careful with what I share. I'm still going through and looking through what do we know and what is it that we don't know.
And the New Jersey, the strange objects over New Jersey were drones.
I still have a lot of questions around that.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard what the public official line is. I just personally still have a lot of questions that are unanswered.
I think we all have a lot of questions. Remember, in January, the White House said there was nothing nefarious about the New Jersey drone sighting. So here's the question. What's the truth? Well, we're going to ask former Pentagon UFO investigator Lou Elizondo to get to it. So, Lou, good to see you. What does Tulsi Gabbard know that we all don't know?
Well, I think it's important to note that Tulsi Gabbard is a very seasoned official. She cut her teeth as a combat veteran and also formerly a field grade officer. So she's not new to the world of intelligence. And I think what she's doing is exactly her due diligence. Before she makes a public statement, she wants to make sure she speaks to all of the 16 intelligence agencies, try to remove all the stovepipes as she can, and really get to the truth of the matter. The bottom line is, look, whenever you admit to the American public that we don't have complete aerodomain awareness of our skies, we don't know what's in our skies all the time, you're also tipping your hand to your adversaries that we have vulnerability. So it's really a catch-22. Tulsi is in a really difficult spot because on one hand, she does have these outstanding questions like the New Jersey drone issue. We now know there was not prosaic explanations for what occurred with every one of those quote-unquote drone sightings. But at the same time, look, you've got 16 intelligence agencies that somehow it's like herding cats. You have to try to get all of them to report information to you. Yeah. And it's one heck of a bureaucracy. It really is.
You mentioned something about the danger of drones, and I hate to say this, another 9/11 style attack. I mean, can you explain to us how we prevent something like this? It's much different warfare than we've ever seen before.
Look, I'm really glad you're saying that. I think the American people would be shocked to learn that in modern warfare now, and you take the Ukraine, there have been more deaths attributed in combat to drones than artillery and infantry combined. Now think about that, right? So we are entering a completely new paradigm on how warfare is conducted. And it's really not much of a stretch to imagine some sort of foreign adversary or someone who wants to do harm to the United States or our national security, rather than using 737s, instead using much cheaper, much more affordable, and much easier to hide drones. They are already being used by drug cartels on our borders for surveillance and for smuggling drugs, and they're also being used right now in combat to kill other human beings. So I think that's a great question, and I think this is why our nation really needs a comprehensive strategy and frankly, maybe even a national intelligence estimate done every year by the DNI, by Tulsi's people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, 100%. It's definitely a reality that we have to be talking about. Before I let you go, I got to ask you, you got former Pentagon scientist Eric Davis said there are 4 types of alien species. There are grays, Nordics, insectoids, And reptilians. I never thought I'd be saying that this morning. Should we be taking anything of this as credible?
I was a nuts and bolts guy. Unfortunately, I can't comment on biologics, but I was more of a nuts and bolts guy.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. The conversation for another day. Lou Elizondo, thanks so much. Good seeing you.
My honor and privilege. Thank you.
All right, so up next, I am going to be taking your questions on the biggest true crime cases that we have seen. 844-968-7720. I'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back, everybody. Jesse Weber filling in for the one and only Chris Cuomo. Now, as many of you may know, I host this podcast called Sidebar, big true crime podcast. So I'm going to take your questions on true crime stories that I've been covering. I want to go to Ron from Lynbrook. Ron, what do you got for us?
Yeah, Jesse, the Rachel Morin case where Hernandez only got life without the possibility of parole after he raped, murdered, kidnapped her, and he was in the courtroom laughing with at the Judge Kern. How about the death penalty? Why can't we impose that?
So unfortunately, it's not legal in that state. But let me tell you something. I cover these cases all the time. For this guy, by the way, no criminal mastermind this guy is. I mean, the evidence couldn't be stronger against him. DNA, digital forensics, photographic evidence. He's going to be spending the rest of his life in prison behind bars. You know, we talk about the Koberger case, what his life is like. That guy, 23 hours a day in a cell, okay, gets out for 1 hour a day. Every other day he showers. This is not a picnic. This is not easy for them. This is going to be a terrible existence for a man who senselessly took that mother's life, and he is getting exactly what he deserves. But that's all I have for us right now here in Cuomo. Thank you so much. We got Leland Vittert starts right now. Leland, good to see you.
Good to see you, Jesse. Great show. Looking forward to the week ahead. Thank you very much, my friend.